Hey, Jordan, I know you ran a little longer on the previous meeting, but we are ready in eScribe and on YouTube.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Just so everyone knows, we'll wait and get started in about 3 minutes or so, since we ran a little late. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and call the Land Use and Planning Committee to order. We continue to meet virtually, as you all know. If you're a member of the public wishing to join the meeting, you can visit our website at missoulapublicmeetings.com, and there you'll find a list of agendas, and you can find the link to join the live Zoom meeting from the agenda. You can provide public comment via the Zoom hand raise feature if you're in the meeting, or by phone at 406-552-6012, or by email at council@ci.missoula.mt.us. Doesn't look like we have any phone participants, but we'll give instructions to them if we do. We have our first item is roll call. Amanda, can you call the roll?
Sure. Anderson?
Present.
Becerra?
Present.
Contos? Absent? Harp?
Here.
Hess?
Present.
Jones,
Present.
oh, there she is. Merrick, absent. Ramos, absent. Cheryl,
Present.
Vasika,
Present.
Von Lossberg, absent. And West.
Present. Present.
I do believe you have a quorum. There's only 4 absents.
Okay, thank you. So we have minutes to approve from September 29th. Are there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will be approved. Is there any public comment on items not listed elsewhere on our agenda? Okay, seeing none, we have 3 regular agenda items. The first 2 are continuations after the public hearing on Monday. And we'll take everything in the order listed. The first item is the annexation of Linda Vista 11th supplement, Linda Vista 18th supplement, and track 3A of certificate of survey number 6798. And Dave DeGrandpre is here with the staff report. And Dave, I'll turn it over to you first to see if there's any additional items that came up in the public hearing or any new information that you'd like to report out on.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jordan. Good afternoon, counselors. Dave DeGrandpre with Development Services. No additional information do I have. There's been no public comment that's been received, no additional agency comment, and no protests for annexation. I know I went through the presentation a little quickly the other night, and so if you'd like me to go over anything, run through kind of the basics again, I'm certainly glad to do that. But Councilor Anderson did have a request of staff to talk about transportation and traffic related issues in the area. And Aaron Wilson, I believe, is here and has volunteered to address those. And so if that pleases the council, Aaron, you ready?
Great. And Stacy's got her hand up. So Stacy, do you have a question or follow up before that?
Yes, I do actually. Thanks so much. I actually think it would be helpful because I think there might be a little bit of confusion from the presentation on Monday. It's 3 different parcels, some of which are actually, which I don't know how this fell through the loop. Those 7 houses on Joy Drive are actually occupied. And so that doesn't actually change the, traffic situation or considerations because those people are already there. And it does sound like there is the other track off of Uncle Robert's Drive, those are actually occupied, where the supplement 18 is raw land that has the potential for more homes, therefore increasing traffic. So if you could just quickly, I hope I have that right, and if I don't, please, if you could just throw up the map and just walk us through that, because I think that is an important component.
All right, sure.
Into Aaron's presentation on traffic.
All right, can you see the map, the areas to be annexed?
Yes, and for the record, John Contos has joined us. Good.
Yes, and then quickly to summarize, to recap, I guess. So it's true, this area here, Linda Vista 18th supplement, that's a subdivision that was approved by the county commissioners in June. Now there are 41 residential lots that are ready to be built on. The streets, sidewalks, boulevard areas, the fire hydrants, water, sewer, stormwater, they're all in place and ready to go. Building permits are pending annexation into the city. So those are undeveloped lots today. The other 2 areas, you have the multi-dwelling complex with 200 units and 17 buildings. Those buildings already exist. The traffic is already there. The demand is already there. And then these 7 lots in the Linda Vista 11th supplement, those also were approved in 2001. They're all developed with homes. They have been for quite some time. And so the traffic is already there as well. All of these areas are served by city water, and city sewer. And so and then technically, for the annexation, we received petitions to annex from the owner, the Lloyd H. White Partnership for Linda Vista 18th supplement, and then also the multifamily structure area. That's track 3A, a certificate of survey 6798. We do not have a petition for Linda Vista 11th, but because those lot owners waived the right to protest annexation, we thought it was expeditious to do all three of these at once. So that's kind of a recap. And then if you have any questions on those types of details, I'd be happy to try to address them.
Great. Aaron, do you want to go into your overview?
Yeah, and just so I have clear, the question is really about what sorts of transportation analysis we've done here and what potential improvements might be on the horizon. Is that a short summary of what council is looking for on that question?
Stacy?
Yeah, I guess basically my concern, and I bring this concern that is shared by many folks who I've spoken to in this area, is that as we continue to expand both south in the Linda Vista additional supplements and southwest in the Teton addition supplements, there continues to be no additional way out of the Linda Vista Miller Creek neighborhood other than the Garrett or roundabout down and then the light there at Highway 93 and Miller Creek Road. And my question that I posed on Monday night that I was hoping to get some clarity around was, when this was all platted in 1998, what was the long-term transportation plan? Because I've heard that there was talk of an additional bridge out either to Blue Mountain or over to Lolo. Obviously, none of that has transpired, but yet we're still adding these subdivision supplements and creating quite more homes, which none of us are going to argue whether or not we need or not. I just am wondering kind of what is the transportation analysis of how much traffic can the current infrastructure handle, and are we at that capacity level, and what's our plans to address this moving forward?
Yeah, well, to answer that first question, probably unsatisfactorily, I don't know that there has been a thorough, well, there may be traffic impact analysis done from all of these, but it's been a long time. And so I couldn't tell you, how close to capacity we are on Lower Miller Creek Road. I know just from work that we've done around, the pinch point is really at Highway 93 and Lower Miller Creek Road, or at least that's one of them, that intersection is likely close to capacity, both for Highway 93 and for Lower Miller Creek Road. There's just not a lot of option to move more traffic through that. But I don't know. I couldn't tell you 100% if we're at full capacity there. Related to some of the other studies and planning that was happening at the time that these subdivisions were approved, including the additional connection across the river to Highway 93, that there was one that I think came off of maybe Lower Miller Creek Road or Old Bitterroot Road. So sort of closer to the Linda Vista golf course. And that bridge was studied. There was a feasibility study that was done in partnership with MDT, and it was determined to not be feasible for a number of reasons. One is the ability to get across the river through sensitive habitat and connect with Highway 93 right there. There's just challenges with slopes and the river and connectivity. And so that feasibility study essentially said that it's not feasible to get a new connection there. It also doesn't really improve traffic conditions because unless people are going to Lolo, all you're doing is routing people back through the Highway 93 Miller Creek intersection. And so you're taking them off of Miller Creek, but you're adding more onto Highway 93. And so you're not actually increasing the capacity of that intersection really at all. You're just sending people through it a different way. So it's a huge investment that's not really feasible, that doesn't really solve our traffic issues. So a couple of other ways, things that we've been looking at, one way you can help mitigate that traffic impact is by distributing modes. There are some unique challenges in this area. One is just the ability to put in bike lanes. We had a bike lane project, if you'll remember, where we did striped a bike lane that had to remove parking in order to get it installed on Linda Vista Boulevard, and the neighborhood requested and council approved that request to remove that bike lane in favor of the parking along that street. And so that sort of limits our multimodal connectivity in the area. Whether it would have been used, I think there's a lot to discuss there, but it's a way to increase, your capacity on an existing roadway that we don't really currently have that opportunity. As far as going south into Lolo, you get similar sorts of feasibility constraints with the river and where you would actually connect into Lolo, that there isn't really a good connecting point, at least not that we have discovered. That could change as we do more analysis, potentially, but it certainly hasn't been the priority given the constraints down in Lolo with the river and wetlands, and just it's really challenging to get new river crossings like that, and tends to be really expensive. And we just don't currently have a funding source that would allow us to do that right now. There are, I think, some opportunities around connectivity within that area. So say along 55th, getting to Garrett, getting to 23rd. Again, it's really challenging because of the topography and the existing development pattern. You just have a lot of cul-de-sacs. You don't have a lot of good grid connectivity. And so there's just limited opportunities to do that. So all of that, I think, is to say that there's increasing pressures, and we don't have as many tools as we do in other places due to a lot of the constraints in this location. So I don't know if that satisfactorily answers your question, Stacy, with any sort of proactive, this is what we're doing to mitigate it. But I think, continuing to look at opportunities for multimodal travel, looking for opportunities to smooth the flow of traffic. We do have a CIP project that's continuing to move forward for Lower Miller Creek Road that will add in sidewalks and better access to the school and bike lanes and potentially some crossings there. So that can help with some localized traffic impact mitigation in that area as you get closer to the initial roundabout. And then, providing as good a bike connectivity, particularly as we think about Brooks Corridor transit improvements, that we could look for things like park and rides or connectors to those high frequency transit lines that might be outside of the traditional realm of a bus running up into Miller Creek, which we know there are also feasibility issues with that based on density and access. But I think there's a lot of emerging technology out there and emerging modes that if we can facilitate those, I think provide more opportunities. And we don't expect everyone to ride a bike, but if you can get 5 or 10% of people, say, riding an e-bike or other mode like that maybe connect to transit and then into the rest of town, that essentially increases the capacity for vehicular traffic that exists today. So that's one way we've been looking at this area and trying to think creatively about how we make those connections and make it comfortable and doable for folks who live in the area.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Stacy, I'm going to stick with you for a minute if you have a follow-up, and then we'll go to Mirta.
Yeah, I actually do. So I guess thank you for all of that information. You're right, there is no easy answer to this. I guess I'm just worried, at what point in time do we feel as though we are overstressing the current infrastructure and actually putting people's lives potentially in danger? This is not exactly the same situation as Grant Creek, where there's literally only one way in and one way out. When we were looking at the development that literally wanted to double their footprint. I realize it's different than that, but at some point in time, I'm worried that we're just continuing to sort of follow the course that was laid out over 20 years ago without sort of figuring out where that stress break point is. And I'm wondering, is there any, we're going to do a traffic study on the speed limits on Upper Miller Creek or Miller Creek Road, right? It's technically called Miller Creek, but all of us call it Upper Miller Creek. But, is there an opportunity to do that so that we actually have some data to figure out what that point, because I know that they're continuing to build not only in this area, but the other part out towards Lolo. And, I definitely think that, folks are feeling like we might be getting close to a tipping point.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point and something that I can certainly look into and talk with Kevin and Surface Transportation and see what sorts of traffic impact analysis has come in or that we've done recently and where we might be in terms of load on our existing infrastructure and what that might mean for future development. I think it's certainly worth looking at.
And one final follow-up, Mr. Chair, if you'll allow.
Sure.
Do we have, I know there's metrics available. So really this annexation only is allowing capacity for 44 more homes because we're just sort of doing some housekeeping and bringing some other existing infrastructure into the city limits. So do we know what the estimated car trip increase by 44 homes is?
Based on the standard ITE, which is the Institute of Transportation Engineers, which is kind of the go-to for estimating trip rates. I think for single family residences, it's 8 trips per day per household for single family. So you're looking at, what is that? 200, 250.
Impressive that you can do that math in your head. Thank you, Aaron.
That's a really, I don't know how accurate that is. That was just a
Let me get my calculator out here. Yes. Okay, great. Thanks so much for that.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. I think it's maybe for Dave, the decision point on transportation impacts is at the time of creating the entitled lots, correct? I mean, the annexation, that's not really a factor before us today. Is that fair?
Typically, that's right. It's the impacts are assessed when a subdivision is being reviewed and approved. And mitigation is typically assessed to the subdivider as a condition of approval. So, for example, if the 41 additional lots were going to push us over the tipping point and require some sort of a traffic control device, a stoplight, for example, the developer could be assessed a proportional share of that cost prior to final plat approval, subdivision plat approval. It's not typically done at annexation.
Thanks. So I've got a queue. We've got Mirta, Stacy, Heidi, and Amber. Mirta, go ahead.
Thank you. Just to follow up on what Aaron was talking about in terms of multimodal transportation and transit, I guess I was just looking at the report and is this part of the MUTD or is it a condition of approval of annexation to petition into the district? It just seems to me like even if it isn't, that should be a requirement just to make sure that if at some point this can have transit, that it would be already into the district. I know that it's significantly more difficult to bring an area into the district later when it's on a voluntary, I guess, or petition by the community versus a requirement. So just wondering if it is a requirement or if it is already a part of the MUTD.
I don't know whether it's within the transportation district. I can sure find out. If it's not, what I'd want to do is coordinate with urban transportation district and make sure that that was a good idea from their perspective. And if so, I could offer it up on Monday night. It could be added as a condition of annexation approval.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, please do follow up on that, Dave. Heidi and then Amber.
I just had a little more general comment. I think what Stacy brought up is very interesting. I I feel like a couple of years ago we had a presentation where we discussed the number of platted but unbuilt lots in our community, and it would be really great to maybe have an update on how many are out there and where they are, and how many have been built out in the last few years. I feel like a lot of these subdivisions sat for over a decade, and are now finally being developed. And obviously Missoula has changed a lot since they were originally platted. Which is not directly related to this annexation, but I think it would be interesting to get an update, especially because a lot of these lots were the lots that were unbuilt were in this part of town, if I remember correctly. So.
Thanks, Heidi. Amber.
I think Heidi's hitting on the exact point I was going to, having not been on council for as long as some other people. Obviously we're tracking more of what is coming to us as we're on council. And I would be really, this isn't having to do with this annexation, but I'd be really interested to see what, is platted but unbuilt. And also, if we approve a subdivision, is that just in perpetuity? Like how long does that last? I don't really know.
Dave, you want to take that?
Yeah, I can take that. So, typically when you grant preliminary approval to a subdivision, so that's essentially giving it a nod of approval, but it's typically subject to several conditions. And those conditions might be that you have to build, roads, install water, install sewer, lots of other things. So typically that is a 1 to 3 year approval, that preliminary approval. There can be extensions. There can also be a phase development that goes up to 20 years with different phases, things like that. But then once a developer has actually met the conditions of approval and has applied for final plat approval, so you've got a couple of stages. You have preliminary plat where you apply the conditions. Once the developer meets the conditions, it comes in for final plat approval. Once those lots are, once the final plat is approved, the subdivision is there. It's a permanent thing. So those lots they don't go away unless specific action is taken to eliminate them.
Amber, does that answer your question?
It does. It just makes me wonder what Heidi was asking again, because we have a lot out there that, yeah.
Stacey.
Well, thank you so much for both Heidi and Amber for their excellent questions. Sorry, I'm not hitting on all cylinders today. So Dave, my question in regards to the answer you just gave to Amber's question, is that, does that statute that sort of like once they're there, they're permanently there, that is a product of state land use law, correct? Not something that is because of our particular zoning codes, correct?
That's right. State law requires all communities to adopt subdivision regulations and subdivision review processes and those sorts of things. They authorize and require it. But so of course we at the city have subdivision regulations. So I guess it's a combination. The state requires it, we implement it.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Are there any additional questions on this item or discussion items? We also have a developer representative here if he would like to provide any comment, or if any members of the public would like to provide any comment. Okay, seeing none, this will be back before us on November 1st for final consideration at City Council. And we can move on. Thank you, Dave. We can move on to our second item, which is the Missoula Connect long-range transportation plan. And Aaron Wilson is here. And Aaron, same for you. If you have any, I know that that Heather had a question on Monday, so you're welcome to address that. But if you have any additional information to provide, or we don't need a full presentation, but I'll turn it over to you to start, and then we can go to questions and discussion.
Perfect. Yeah, and John may be joining us. He had a conflict that until probably, well, we'll see if he can make it. But I don't know that I have anything else to add. I mean, nothing has really changed on this since we presented Monday. We're really at the very tail end of this process of adopting the long range transportation plan. And I know there were some questions and conversation around land use and how the long range transportation plan is facilitating or meshing with our land use strategies. And I could talk about some of those issues. And then Heather, you had a question about, I believe, about how we're balancing sort of perfection and practicality in terms of getting projects done in this long range transportation plan. And I can address that one, I think, well, I don't know if it's an easy answer, but a fairly straightforward answer that we're always, I think, in transportation, because there are more demands than there is room and funding to do all the things that we want to do. So really every project is a balance between those various, not necessarily competing interests, but varied interests and outcomes that we want to achieve. And so the plan itself, I think, is our ideal outlook, or maybe not even ideal, but this is, what we are striving to accomplish in transportation. And then as we get into implementation, we will have to make decisions on opportunities as they arise and funding, obviously trying to increase the amount of funding. And then as we get into designing each of these projects, there's always a more focused process to say, here's what the long range plan says we should do in this location or for this project, or generally for all transportation. And then we look at what's our available right of way, what's our budget for this project, what are all of the various interests that we're trying to accommodate. And the long range plan is a guide for how we make those decisions, but every project is different, and you're always trying to look at those factors that may be at a finer scale than you did at the long range plan when you get to actually implementing those projects. So a good example that's been in the news lately, because we're working on it, is the Higgins Corridor project, where we're looking at the section from Broadway to Brooks. That's a project that's in the long range transportation plan as a high priority. And we've been having conversations around what are the various needs for that corridor in terms of parking and transit access and safety and bicycle and pedestrian access and even vehicular access, sort of what is the purpose of that corridor and how can we accommodate all those different modes. And so we haven't landed on solutions. We're still developing some different alternatives, but every project you go in and you look, okay, here's 3 or 4 different ways that we can slice up this corridor for different facilities. And then we try to balance the pros and cons of each of those. And sometimes maybe you end up with a much more practical solution because you just have challenges you have to address. And maybe that's related to safety. Maybe it's related to vehicular capacity. Maybe it's a transit corridor or whatever it might be. So it's a long, convoluted way of saying that it's always a balance on every project. And we try to do the best we can with the guidance. And really the long range plan is the overall framework for how we make those decisions. But it's not necessarily giving us all the answers for every project. Does that answer your question around that, Heather?
Very much so, Aaron. I really appreciate. I know it's a nebulous answer to a nebulous question, but I appreciate you taking the time to kind of articulate that and let us know that there really is a spectrum of perfection and practicality that we got to navigate, and it's hard work. And I'm glad you're up to the challenge.
And then I think we talked a little bit about the land use connection in our presentation, but that was a theme in this long range plan update that we really wanted to dive into and hit as hard as we can, because there are just a lot of conversations about how we're growing as a region and how the last agenda item is a perfect example of you can't separate the transportation pieces from the growth decisions that we're making. And so we tried to really emphasize that as much as possible, both in our analysis. We did some scenario analysis that included looking at different growth outcomes that we might implement and how that affects the transportation system. And if we can grow more efficiently and compact, that there are very distinct advantages to and efficiencies in the transportation system that we can achieve that we wouldn't otherwise be able to, that don't have anything necessarily to do with the transportation investments. And then as John highlighted, we have a number of specific spotlights and call outs of areas like the North Reserve, Scott Street, the Swatupkane master plan, and trying to bring those into the long range plan and look at what transportation investments we need to make to connect to those areas and serve them and adequately support that growth in those locations so that we can foster the right type of growth in those areas. And then transit is the other piece that we spent a lot of time thinking about how that relates, that in the past we haven't necessarily thought as much or as comprehensively about how transit fits into the bigger picture. And so we did spend a fair amount of time both thinking about our land use decisions and what that means for transit, and how we're planning for that long term. And so where those overlaps are. Again, the long range plan isn't telling us how to make necessarily what those decisions are or giving us the answers to those decisions, but is hopefully will be a useful tool and guide for you and others as you make land use decisions, looking at the transportation plan and trying to understand what those impacts are and how we can ensure that we have a cost-effective and efficient transportation system in the long term. So that was definitely very much a big focus of what we're trying to accomplish with this long range plan.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah.
Questions or discussion or public comment? Okay. Seeing nothing further, we can probably move on. Thank you, Aaron. And we'll have this back for final consideration again on Monday, November 1st.
Yeah, thanks. And I just had one other thing I forgot to mention that you'll notice in the resolution for this adoption is that we will be replacing the 2016 long range transportation plan as an issue with Missoula Connect, our new update. So it's sort of a replacement rather than an adding to, if that makes sense.
You know, and I want to say too that this is in some ways kind of a pro forma action, or it's a routine step to adopt this plan as part of the growth policy, but it's worth highlighting that this is a pretty visionary plan that had a ton of input from the public and a really great team working on it. And it's a great plan, and it lives as an addenda to our issue or to our growth policy, but it also is a great standalone document and has a lot of value. So congratulations on putting together a quality plan, and our community will be better for it. So,
yeah, thanks. And hopefully we'll be back with more updates and talking about it in the future.
Yeah, that'd be great. So we can move on. This actually dovetails really nicely into our last item, which is a presentation on the growth policy update. And Ben Brewer is here from CPDI, and Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, my name is Ben Brewer. I'm a supervisor in the long range planning section of community planning and CPDI. And I'm here to update you all and go through our recent 5-year review of the growth policy. And like Jordan said, this is a nice dovetail with Aaron's talking about the long range transportation plan. And so from community planning to transportation planning, just want to wish him congratulations as well on a big project. And we're looking forward to working closely with him and his team on that as things move forward with the growth policy, hopefully. So I'm going to set up a presentation here for you. slowly but surely. So thanks for giving us the time to talk about this. It looks like we're going to have plenty of time, and that's great. We're really here to set up a conversation about the growth policy and hear from you, thoughts and feedback that you have. I'm here representing the community planning section in CPDI, as well as Neil Pennanen, a planner and GIS analyst in our section as well. And we've been working closely with a functional working group, the interdepartmental working group, with representatives from various agencies and departments and divisions within the city that have been lending their support to this as well. And I just want to give a nod to and shout out to Tom Zavitz, who was the primary senior planner on this project initially, but has retired from the city and so is not here at this point. But he was responsible for getting this project off the ground and going forward. So every 5 years, Montana State Code requires that a growth city or municipality or locality's growth policy be reviewed. And that comes from state statute. I just want to point out that within that state law, there's language of doing a review and revising the policy if necessary. And so we also include an approach to doing this 5-year review in the growth policy itself, which includes criteria for how to do that and an approach for how to do that. But I just want to make clear from the beginning that this project that we're presenting on today is a review specifically, and not yet at least any kind of update to the growth policy, though we'll be talking about what that could involve as this moves forward. And so, we're similar to what Jordan was saying about the transportation plan. This is a requirement, but we're also using this as an opportunity to, take a step back, take stock of the growth policy and how it's been performing, and use this as a chance to review and evaluate and analyze the policy. And where that leads is to some kind of a determination on whether changes are needed or warranted. And so we want to check in with you about that determination today as well. So I know that you all are very familiar with the growth policy and what's in it, but I do just want to walk through really quickly a quick overview of the policy for just as a foundation and for those who may be listening today. The growth policy is the foundational policy that cities use in Montana to implement land use strategies and regulations. It's the required foundational document in order to implement zoning. And the policy is generally responsible for guiding planning for future urban growth, generally over the 20-year period. Our city really sees our growth policy as its North Star towards guiding city policy. And that's led into being used to inform the recent city strategic plan as well. I wanted to put the web page URL on this page for anyone who may want to find the growth policy and the related materials, which are basically the growth policy document itself, and then the associated future land use map. So just to do a quick kind of tour of what is in the policy, and this is going through the document itself. It provides the introduction to what it is and the process that was used to create it. Again, that was in 2015 that the growth policy was adopted. And then the bulk of the policy consists of the 6 elements. And this is where we really house the policy statements themselves. And so these are broken out into these buckets of how they apply to the community, livability, safety and wellness, economic health, housing, community design, and environmental quality. And those also tie into specific actions that are listed in the policy, and the actions and outcomes chapter is divided into a smaller set of priority actions and then the full list as well. And those are organized in different ways. There's a chapter on the land use recommendations, and this applies directly to the land use map. A chapter on cooperation and coordination with other agencies, guidance on subdivision regulations, and then a chapter on the growth policy amendment processes, and that's where we find our guidance on how to conduct this review. And finally, there are a series of appendices that are included in the document, quite a few actually, and the primary one of which is the community profile, which includes the data and demographic information that informed creating the policy. And finally, the future land use map itself is a part of the policy and how it's mapped to the ground. And again, that ties back to those the land use recommendations chapter. And information on how the land use map is designated can be found on our What's My Zoning map on the city webpage, amongst other places. So I'm going to walk through what was reviewed for as part of this process. And again, just to identify who was involved here, the review was primarily carried out internally, at first at least, by staff in the community planning section. And then we worked with guidance and support from a functional working group. And we based the review around these 9 review criteria that are listed in the growth policy. And I'm going to go through these one at a time and give a general summary of what we found. And I guess I'll say at this point, and I'll mention again probably, but we'd have a Engage Missoula page dedicated to this project at engagemissoula.com, and the materials associated with the project are listed there. And so, which includes the report itself and associated materials. And so, what I'm going to go through today for my presentation is really a summary of those materials. But for anyone who wants to see them more in depth, definitely the report is the place to go. So the first criteria was changes in the legal framework regarding the growth policy or its implementation, and that really means were there any changes at the state level, of which there were not any. So there was not not much to review on that end. The next criteria were significant changes in existing conditions and projected trends. We read this as really relating back to that community profile and seeing if there have been indications of changes in trends that from what were documented or indicated in the original community profile. And one of the challenges for this project was that until very, very recently, as in the last week or two, the most recent census data has not been available. And so we, for the purposes of this review at least, look to other sources, and some of those include recent outreach and survey efforts by the city, including the resident survey that's done on a yearly basis, and so found some changes in the responses to that. And we also built, leaned on the various planning efforts that have been carried through over the last 5 or 6 years since the adoption of the growth policy as well, to inform how we looked at this, and a general finding from this and recommendation is that we update our community profile as soon as we are able to, when the data is available. But something that runs through the report is generally that the issues that are really affecting the Missoula community and really on people's minds and creating pressure are not necessarily that different from what was considered when the growth policy was adopted, but that many of them are, there's an increased urgency to them and are more heightened. The next three criteria were changes in the circumstances upon which the goals and objectives are based, which we saw as the circumstances around which the policy was adopted, which again, we see as being generally consistent, but with several, if not many of those issues heightened. Of course, the pandemic is a new factor. Changes in community goals, which we see as have there been changes in the vision of the policy, or changes in the community's vision of what we are and what we should be. And the primary or main finding that came out of that was really this an increased or more focused interest and challenge in equity in our community, and a need to look at that more closely. And finally, the degree to which meeting goals and objectives have been met. And that's really, in this criteria, I think specifically looking at the policies that we have and whether they're being implemented or not. The growth policy is broken down kind of at the most broad level into goals for what the community wants to achieve, and then more specifically for each goal is broken into different objectives, and then those goals and objectives are translated over into a set of actions that we want to see achieved. And there are quite a few of all of these. There's 83 goals, 296 objectives, and 269 actions listed throughout the growth policy. And so another one of our findings, I think, is that this is a it's robust and it covers a lot, and that's really beneficial and helpful. There's probably redundancies amongst these that we could better organize and be more focused in what we're aiming for. And so generally with these criteria, I just wanted to point to the recent city strategic plan, which really has been a recent distillation of many of our policy goals, but especially including the growth policy. And so we saw that as a positive sign of as far as pursuing and meeting these goals. We also are going to get into this, but we've evaluated an update of our actions, or at least our prioritized actions, and found that most of those have been met over the last 5 or 6 years. Another way that these are being moved forward. And then you see the role that the growth policy plays, especially in application reviews of development projects and things like that, like you were discussing earlier today. And so plays a role in that regard as well. The next criteria that we looked at was the completion of implementation strategies. And so we really focused on our priority action list. A report was given to City Council in 2019. That was our first kind of biennial report on how we were doing with implementing growth policy prioritized actions. And this table shows both what was found in that report and then updated to today to be current. And so really you can see where we were kind of completing some actions, but still had some ways to go on others. By this point, we have really gotten to the point where a lot of, or the majority by far of the prioritized actions that we have been implemented and completed, at least to some degree. So that's a positive sign. This is another way of presenting that information, but broken out by the 6 elements. And the way the growth policy is organized, each element indicates which actions relate to it. And so this is another way of kind of tracking how we're doing, and you know, for the most part, many of the actions that pertain to each element are being implemented well, and there's been movement on that. Another criteria is whether there's been any deviation from the implementation timetable, and this we really look at the designations that were given in the growth policy for how soon or not, you know, we hope to see the various actions implemented. And the way that this is organized in the growth policy is on the full list of actions, and so you'll see a much greater number here of what we would be tracking. Basically all of the priority actions are included in that near-term category, and so the previous tables were really looking at a subset of those near-term actions. You know, again, our recommendation that came out of this in the report was that there's a lot of actions, and we recommend kind of reevaluating what those contain and seeing where there's room to be more focused and narrow our focus to be more efficient. These are the final criteria that we looked at. They include the public input that we gather that may suggest the need to make changes. And we looked at that in two ways. You know, one was public input that we wanted to try to receive during this review process. But then we also looked at it in a broader sense as far as what's the input and trends and comments that we've received in planning projects and processes in general over the previous 5 years. And I'm going to get into that a little more specifically after this slide, but just to say the final criteria was knowledge of specific amendments that would improve the growth policy's usefulness. And we you know, had ideas for some of those going into this review, but we've also accumulated more as the process has gone along, as we've gotten input. And so that we have a list of recommendations basically that's included in the report that we'll get into further as well. So as I said, the project started with an internal staff review component, and that was really an internal administrative process that was assisted by this working group that included representatives from other agencies. So that was, of course, very helpful to get that additional perspective and guidance on what we should be addressing. And then coming out of that, when we had the draft of the review report ready, we rolled out into more of a public comment period, an agency comment period. So those consisted of setting up an Engage Missoula project page, and that was available to access the materials and be educated about the process, and also provided several ways to engage and provide comment and ideas for us. We also presented on this to several public meetings, including Community Forum, the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee, and then we presented a planning board earlier this month on the 5th of October, and are here tonight to provide this final presentation and receive your feedback and thoughts, and then from here we hope to finalize this project. So the public comment that we received from Engage Missoula is summarized here. We had quite a few people visit the page itself, and that's seen in the these numbers here, and then the number of people that really engaged. That means left some kind of comment or participated is in the box below it. We included a quick poll, kind of a one-question survey that we'll present here, and that was and quite a few people participated in that. And then we received several comments, and both through just a direct space to write a message or a comment, or through this ideas and innovation tool, which is a little more flexible and provides more of a way to upload pictures or videos or ideas for things that we should be considering. And then beyond the people that were able to comment during this through the page, there were quite a few people as well that either downloaded a document or visited some of the other tools on the site. And then just, I think this is a nice summary, though it's just a summary, I think, but that was included on this page, which was a quick poll survey, which asked what the most pressing issue facing Missoula is for those visiting. And by far, the majority of people answered that the rising cost of living and especially housing is what the most pressing issue is. But other options, including impacts related to climate change, limited economic opportunity, prevalence of systems of privilege and oppression, and community change related to growth and development, were included and got some answers. And then, quite a few people also indicated that all of these are clearly issues for the community. I wanted to summarize the comments that we received from the planning board, which we were able to have a discussion after this presentation with them, as I'm hoping to do with you today. And these are some of the main points that came out of that. One is there's been an interest in how, if there are updates to the growth policy, how that can and should interact or coordinate with what's happening in the urban fringe areas around the city, especially in regard to the county rezoning process that's underway. There were points made that addressing homelessness more specifically or more fully in the growth policy should be pursued, and potentially things like air quality and more environmental risks, and especially impacts from potential climate change events. And finally, we had a bit of a discussion about how, really, I think there's a sense that the growth policy is in a pretty good place. It was a very robust process that led to the creation and adoption of the policy. And so we heard, that this is something to really be proud of, but some of the history following that was that the zoning was never updated fully to match the new policy, and a real interest that our code should meet our policy. And then finally, again, one of the ways that we saw as evaluating public comment was to also acknowledge and consider the recent policy that's been worked on and adopted by the city since the growth policy was adopted in 2015. And for that, I was going to just to illustrate here a little bit. This is the Engage Missoula page, where this is the project is listed, and again, the materials that came out of that are available on this page. And one of the materials that came out of the report is a list of the adopted policies that either policies that have been adopted or are in the works in the last 5 or 6 years. And with this group, I just wanted to take the opportunity to kind of scroll through this and see how much has been done on the policy front, especially since so many of you have been involved in this and participating in this. And so I think, one of our big findings for the report was just the kind of sheer volume of policy work that has been that we've achieved in Missoula, in the city of Missoula, and in the community of Missoula, really over the last 5 or 6 years. Let's see if I can go back to presentation mode here. And so just to sum up kind of where we are now, we did make a few changes to the materials for the review coming out of planning board and the comment period. Some of them we're just kind of updating the document to be current with where we are today. But we also added some additional recommendations to the list of recommendations in Appendix A, and then updated our public comment summary to be current. And so we're here to what did we determine? What did the review determine? And in the short answer is that we staff, I should say, are recommending that updates to the growth policy are warranted and should be considered. And the way that this is presented again is through a review report, and then that includes some supplemental materials that inform what's in the report. So there's a series of appendices that are included with that report. That's all again available on Engage Missoula, and then is uploaded to eScribe as well. So I wanted to go over just a few of the key takeaways. I think that, again, to sum them up that came out of this, the issues that stand out that we identified and heard about going through this that are most pressing to the Missoula community really are housing, of course, and then as well, and then also the community change that we're seeing due to development, issues of equity and poverty, and concerns over resiliency related to climate change. A lot of these issues are not new. These are not new challenges, but they are more urgent, and the experience of them is one that is heightened and more exacerbated. As I was saying earlier, there's been a lot of policy work that we've done in response to these issues. A lot of policy work has been achieved, and now it's time to catch up as far as implementation of those policies. In general, the actions update that we did as part of this project shows that almost all the priority actions are being or have been implemented, which is a good sign as far as implementation of the growth policy, but the full list of actions should be updated and refined. And then we're looking forward to the community profile update, and think that will be really, really important to give us a more current and accurate idea of what is going on in the community as we move forward with future work. I'm going to walk through kind of a summary of what our recommendations are for the growth policy, and then we're just about done with my presentation. So I'm looking forward to hearing what thoughts you have. Our recommendations is in the Appendix A of the report. And before I start kind of going through them, I do just want to, again, put out a disclaimer of sorts, which is that, this is a suggested list, and it's in no ways final or certain or exhaustive or complete. And so it's really a conversation starter. It's not in any way committing to any of these specific things that are listed yet, but they are all ideas that were identified as part of this project that we should be considering. And so we broke out this list of recommendations into 3 categories. The first is technical, just kind of maintenance updates to the growth policy document. One of the big ones of those is updating the community profile, but also and refining and reorganizing the actions, and also looking at kind of the organization in general of between the goals, objectives, and actions, again, for some of those redundancies that we found between those different levels of policy. And then just general updates to make the document more current and up to date. The second category that we included is our actual policy changes potentially, or updates or modifications. We are recommending evaluating and considering updates to the land use map and associated changes to the land use designations and that chapter that informs the map. We are recommending to better address equity in the growth policy, and that could tie into the map as well. We think that the our Missoula Development Guide, which is a report on development in the community, could be better incorporated into the growth policy. And then looking to clarify how issue and neighborhood plans inform the growth policy and vice versa. And then our final category or area of the policy we think needs attention is implementation and usability. And we think, part of this, at the beginning of this project, we started this and it's kind of gone on to its own track, but we think a growth policy user guide would be a helpful tool to help implement the growth policy. We want to consider establishing an ongoing implementation team and or explore other ways of more intentionally implementing the growth policy. Improving data availability and usability, including improved key performance indicators, increased public participation and engagement with education and amendments. And then we also think we should explore maybe an enhanced web presence. Again, those are a summary of what's what we're recommending. And finally, I just want to walk you through what we see as the next steps coming out of this review project. As you can see, we've broken out kind of this review itself in this upper level of this chart, and then there's a variety of ongoing and future projects that are related to this and will be informed by this. And so we are, we hope at the finalization point of this report in October. And there's a few different kind of tracks that we see the next steps of work in the growth policy going. One of those is the developing and finalizing and rolling out a user guide as an education and outreach tool. And then specifically related to growth policy amendments, we're looking at the community profile update and an update to the OMDG report that I just mentioned. And then a variety of other additional amendment work we see is moving ahead that we'll be considering and needing to talk through and work through. A lot of that will tie in to the comprehensive code reform project that is just getting up and running. And I'm happy to talk more about how this might tie into that as well, if there are questions. But in general, we're in the developing the RFP stage. We are aiming to have that released or advertised by the end of the year in December. And then sometime early next year, having selected consultants for that project and getting to the point where we're ready to start moving forward with that project. And then there's a variety of other ongoing projects that will that tie into this and will inform growth policy work as well. Updates to our subdivision regulations coming out of recent legislative changes, the transportation options action plan that's in the works currently, and we'll give recommendations for potential approaches and strategies for enhancing transportation options around town. And then finally, a housing incentives project that's also already ongoing. with that, that's what I have for you today. And again, I'm looking forward to hearing any thoughts that you have. And really, again, we wanted to frame this as a chance to step back and take stock of the growth policy. So this is a good opportunity for us to hear from you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. That was a really thorough and useful presentation, and it's a complex project, and it's an exciting one. So, Heather, do you want to start us off?
Sure thing. Ben, thank you for this, as Jordan said, I think an in-depth presentation on a topic that really is very incredibly relevant to our community. And I think myself thinking about how the last 4 years I've been learning about the importance of policy, but then also recognizing that policy can either sit on a shelf or we can start to implement things. And kind of pulling one of the quotes from your slides came from the planning board. Our code should meet our policy. And it is very evident that our zoning code does not meet our growth policy. So I guess we can look at either a couple of different options. We can go ahead and take the next steps of implementing a zoning overhaul that we know is going to take 2 to 3 years, just knowing how long it took Missoula County to do that project themselves. There's an option of just having a city initiated full brush approach, like just make it match and let the cards fall where they may. Or there's a third option of adopting some interim rules that would allow some incremental change so that as we go through that zoning overhaul process, that we can work to and tweak those implementation pieces rather than trying to expect perfection at the end of 3 years. And I guess I'm wondering from your perspective, and Jordan as our LUP leader as well, what would you like to see happen?
Ben, you wanna start us off?
Sure, and maybe a starting point, Heather, would be to kind of talk through how we're envisioning the code reform work to get more of a sense of that.
That'd be great.
Okay, yeah. So, and you're right. You're absolutely right that there are juxtaposed maybe challenges that there's a need for action and a response that's timely to these issues that we're dealing with, and there's but we want to do it right, and we want to do it, but there's an interest that it be done well and completely and be thought through, and so that kind of leads to the comprehensive approach, I guess. So I'll just walk through the big building block components of how we've been talking about the code reform project, and then maybe we can kind of get more into the details a bit, but because really there are multiple challenges we're trying to address all together in the code reform project, right? There is the need for increased housing supply, the need for the ability for development to meet the need and to and increase the supply of housing that's available, and for it to do it in a way that that is clear and streamlined and provides a way to get that in the pipeline and going and on the ground. And then there's and so that's one kind of side of this, and then on another is the impacts that rapid development has in our community, and that can the challenges that can create on a community level. And so there's there are ways to address the challenges that come out of that, but they take community conversation, and they take engagement and participation, and coming up with the right fit for where we are. And so the way that we're trying to both kind of make this a successful approach with those two kind of challenges in mind. And so and this is informed by other processes that have come before this, we've gotten recommendations and feedback and had community conversations about what are ways to maybe address some of this. And so just to kind of sum up the general approach that we're looking at for the code reform project is to break it into kind of two corollary tracks that we at this point are calling the implementation track and the innovation track. And basically where it's going is to adopt what's called a Unified Development Ordinance, a UDO, so that we have a approach to our land use regulations that is synchronized, aligned, and clearly understandable, easy to navigate. And so the way, and currently we have these, various titles, city titles that that address different kind of components of land use and development. And so the idea behind, or the benefit behind a UDO is that you bring it all into one place, and so you're using the same definitions and processes and it's all packaged together so that it holds hands, and it's managed together and maintained together. And so that is kind of our one major component of this that is meant to create a response to kind of the some of the challenges that we hear about on the development side. Now, the other piece of this that we're looking at is what you were talking about, Heather, which is that our code should reflect our policy. And so, a UDO in itself doesn't necessarily do that if you're bringing together regulations that are already on the books and aren't necessarily doing that. And so the other side of this, and what we think will kind of lead to this being a longer project, is that we need to identify what codes are not accurately reflecting our policies or not enacting our policies, identify them, have a conversation about how they should be, or what the right approach is to implementing, and then developing those new codes. And so that's what we're calling the innovation track for this. And where that really begins is what's called an audit, a land use regulations audit or zoning audit. And the purpose of that is to look at our regulations and evaluate them for how well or not they are actually achieving what we're trying to do with our policies. And so, the thing about an audit is that it's really meant to identify the issues, not necessarily to determine solutions. And so there's a step that we first, we think we need to have, where coming out of that audit, that's where we start really get into that conversation here and with the community about what do we do with this? What's the right direction to head with this? Having now that our eyes are wide open, I guess you could say, or that that we've identified what our issues are. And so basically those are two concurrent things where we see, we know we want to go to a UDO, and so we think we can start that now and soon get that going, and set up basically the UDO structure using the rules that we have now, with the idea that as we go through the audit and develop new codes that are updated and modernized and synced up or aligned with our policies, that those can then be inputted or added in to the UDO that will be there waiting for it when, as we identify those. So, we kind of see this as being a phased approach, with the first main deliverable probably being the outcome of the audit. But hopefully shortly after that, having gotten to the point where we've actually set up an initial UDO that we can adopt and put into action, and so that it can facilitate this more streamlined development process and development review, and knowing that when we get to that point where we're ready, that UDO will then be updated with more innovative code. And I think that's something that we're hearing about, is something we need to consider, is how and when we add the new code, the new innovations in, whether it's as they come online and they're ready, and at various points, or all together kind of at the end of the project, or what. But those are the way I see it, at least, or understand it at least, the main building blocks of how we're envisioning the code reform process.
Thanks, Ben. Jordan, may I have a follow-up to that?
Go ahead, Heather.
What I can't remember from the budgetary process when we approved the funding, the code reform project, is that going to be an internal study or audit and modernization of the code, or is that also going to be where we will hire a consultant to help us with that process?
Yeah, the audit will be included in the work done by the consultant.
Okay.
Oh, I mean, we'll assist with it, but they'll be.
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So next, Heidi, and then Mirta.
I was just trying to remember the day that we heard this during budget committee meetings, because I feel like it's hard to, there were a lot of parallel processes in the bringing policy to align with our growth policy process. And I want to say it maybe was on our BCOW committee on August 12th would be my guess, because that's when we heard development services. So I think there's a very good visual representation of what parallel processes will be happening to get us towards having this aligned, I guess, policy that's more aligned with our growth policy and other community goals. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Mirta?
The planner in me is loving this. I think it's great that we are moving towards a UDO. That is the wave of the future. And I think that so many communities who have implemented it have gone through some growing pains. I think at the beginning, it's just a little challenging to get it going, but after it's in place, I think it really does do quite a bit in terms of efficiency, consistency, and more than anything is that collaboration that needs to happen between all the different departments. So I'm super excited to see that happen. And I guess my question is, the audit, will that take into consideration, for example, things like what are some of the areas in town that are underzoned or underdeveloped, so that we can have a really clear vision of how we set our goals for the growth policy, and how soon will the audit take place?
Well, just the hope is that we can we'll have selected the consultants for this project by early next year. So I think the hope is end of January, sometime in February, and then the audit is one of the first components of the project. So it would be getting going, soon after that, in spring of next year, I guess, is probably what that would be looking like. And yes, so the looking at the land use map is something that we are anticipating as for this project. And I think, I guess without getting ahead of myself as far as my familiarity with the project, with the code reform project at this point, I don't know that how much more to say about that. I will say that, one of the things that we're thinking about a lot and talking a lot about a lot, and looking forward to guidance from the consultants that we're able to bring onto this project, is to try to figure out what the relationship between code work and the growth policy will be, because there's the land use map, and then there's the zoning, as how the zoning applies the land use map. And I think it's unclear to us how much attention will and should be given to one or the other, if that makes sense. But they're interconnected, and if it's identified that the solution, or that the path forward, or the strategy, or that is decided makes more sense to focus on zoning, it may go more towards zoning. Or if it makes more sense to reevaluate the land use map, then that's that could be a different direction, or added to that.
Thanks, Jordan. I have one more point that I just wanted to,
Go ahead.
before I forget. I've had a constituent call me, and I had a really good conversation with him about including food policy and food security as part of the growth policy update. And so, I think that as we continue to grow, I thought that was a really smart thing to look at as we continue to grow. So just wanted to put that plug in for looking at food policies and food securities as part of a comprehensive look for our growth policy.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited, just like Mirta mentioned, about the code reform process and how that intersects with the growth policy update. I think that's probably going to necessarily going to have to be a bit of a fluid process. I imagine that we may have multiple things that come up through that process that need to be integrated into the growth policy, but I'm really excited about that. I feel like a lot of the planning board comments really resonate with me. It would be great. I know that there's some challenges with rezoning the city wholesale to match the growth policy land use map. But there's certainly some benefits of that as a thought exercise, and probably as a practical matter. There's some huge benefits there. And so I hope we explore that through the code reform process and kind of figure out how to align our code a little better. I think that'll all naturally materialize as we move along. One thing that we haven't really talked about that I think we should start talking about is the growth policy and our transportation documents, and all of our planning documents, really, our utility plan and our annexation plan, have all had the focus inward concept, which I'm still a strong proponent of. But I wonder if it's time for kind of some evaluation of focus inward plus clustered node development in reasonable places, whether that's Frenchtown or Lolo or the Y or Bonner, or areas that are not inward in the sense of our focus inward mindset, but maybe should have a little bit of attention, or a little bit of coordination between the city and the county's new zoning process. And I say that primarily because people are moving to those outlying areas as a function of housing cost. And if we don't recognize that through the growth policy, then I think that might be a mistake. I think there's a way to recognize that and to shape good node development that feeds into our inward focused development. So I hope we can spend a little bit of time kind of kicking around that concept. But I'm really excited about the analysis that you've done, Ben, and I think that the update process has a lot of really clear direction now because of that review process. A couple of hands up. I've got Heather and then Mirta. Oh, Heather, you're muted yet.
I took my hand down instead, sorry. So along the ideas of nodes, I've often been thinking of them more just even inside of our city center itself. So along the Brooks corridor, for example, out towards where Ward 5, where they just don't have, they have the residential neighborhoods, but there's really just not much in terms of service. And I've often thought that area would really benefit from nodes. I would like to see more discussion about the concept of building out those nodes, not just as Jordan had mentioned, but even a little bit more central to Missoula.
Mirta?
Yeah, along the same lines, you brought up node developments and really any development that is not totally focused on city center. I hope that we really look at the benefits of transit-oriented development and how we can bring in transportation as a more robust part of how we look at growth and land use in our community. There are some true benefits and some really good guidelines for how to grow with transit in mind, given that more and more people tend to live outside of the city core. I think it's important for us to focus also on transit and transportation.
And I think it's really important to maybe talk about transportation more as part of the solution to our housing challenges. I think I'd like to see us look a little bit more at housing cost plus transportation costs, which are the two largest household costs. And if we can reduce transportation costs through good land use planning, that can really have some impacts on our housing challenges. I'd like to see us maybe explore that relationship a little bit more explicitly from a cost standpoint. Heather?
And just building upon that, when we think about climate change being our #1 problem that we face, transportation and affordable housing are absolutely at the top of that list. So they are very much interrelated to dealing with climate change. And I think we got to put more power or more effort behind this.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. Would anyone else like to comment on this? I guess, Ben, what's useful for you as far as, do you have any questions that we can help fill in, or what would be the best way for us to engage today and moving forward?
I think certainly if you have any other, this is a great opportunity or time to kind of download thoughts that you have on the growth policy, or if there's things that you've experienced in using it, that we should know about or be considering. This is a good time to hear about it. Of course, you can always follow up with us if they occur to you later. And I think this was we're thinking of this project as a one of the kickoff, or not. I take that back. Not as the kickoff for code reform, but as certainly tying into it. And so I hope this has kind of helped pave the way a little bit for how we might be thinking and talking about that as it moves forward and gets to the point where it really gets going. And so if there are even things related to that project that are coming out of this that we should know as well, that would be great. And then, for this group especially, I guess I'd be curious if there are, just things related to the usability of the growth policy that you have feedback on. When we've talked about the idea of a user guide, this group specifically was one of our key user groups that we've been thinking about, along with people in the community and development community and staff and whatnot. But our intent for that was to provide an additional tool to be able to kind of distill down or interpret or help interpret what's in the policy and how to apply it for these various situations and scenarios that you end up using it for. And so that was one of our big focuses on, as we were going through this.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Jordan, I really appreciate this long conversation that keeps going. Appreciate it. One of the other things that has been brought to my attention, when Minneapolis did away with all of their single family housing zoning, and they made it possible for duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes to be put in place, it created this opportunity, obviously, for consternation throughout the community. But I think one of the things that at least I have experienced in the last 4 years is that every project that comes before this body is always contentious. And it's contentious because the existing neighbors don't want more neighbors. And one of the things I have found is that because our zoning code does not match our land use policy and our growth policy, there is opportunity for more hard feelings to continue to develop throughout our community, and those who are homeowners have more power over those who are renters in our community. And that has just been the case for a long period of time. And if we are serious about tackling equity and poverty in our community, it just makes sense that we start to take the bold steps to make sure that we have input at the early part of the process when it comes down to land use, and not with every single infill project or greenfield project. So just put that into your consideration in your process, Ben, please.
Thanks.
Ben, on your question of the user guide, I'm really excited about that in concept, and I think that could be really helpful. And I know I've mentioned it to you, but I think figuring out a way to kind of adjudicate or like a conflict hierarchy almost, because sometimes the growth policy conflicts with itself, or objectives of the growth policy conflict with one another. So if we're prioritizing, if a project has elements of local agriculture and historic preservation, and not all of these things can exist in all places at all times. So how do we determine which objectives are the most important? I think that's something that would be really important within the user guide. Because the growth policy has, so many objectives that are all really important around livability and walkability and housing affordability and sustainable development. And when those are in conflict, how do we choose?
Yeah, that's a great point, and something we certainly hear about a lot. And I guess I think maybe it would be helpful to hear from this group whether it seems like that's something that reflects back on our policies, and whether there's some kind of prioritization of policies that we should be considering, or one is potentially has more weight than another, or if there's approaches to how we mediate between the, policies that potentially have conflicting aims or visions, and what can go into mediating the differences between them so that there's a solution that addresses it all together, which I know is a challenge. But I think that's it is something that we anticipate coming out of the audit process, is that our focus is certainly to evaluate our codes and how our codes are working to implement our policies. But we would anticipate that it will bring up some or raise some flags about what at the policy level might be creating challenges as well. And so it's something that we'll probably be talking through more or needing to address as well. We just don't know to what extent, but it's a challenge to, I guess I would say that one of the main takeaway, or one of the main messages that we're putting into, or that we'd like to advertise in the guide, is that it's not a one size fits all policy, and that there are ways in which the policy might apply in one context differently than in another, but that clearly is can cause confusion. So navigating how to communicate that is something we're working through. But it's something that I think we hope to kind of for you to hear more about and receive feedback before it's something that kind of becomes something we use regularly. I think it's the kind of thing we want to take care and fine tune and make sure that it's accurately reflects the growth policy, but is also helpful and not an added complication or something like that, for if and when we're able to roll it out.
Yeah, that's helpful, Ben. Any additional discussion here, or Ben, anything else on your end?
No, I don't think so. Thanks for taking the time to talk through this. And I mean, I'm certainly available if you want to keep talking. We've got more time, and I'm happy to talk as much about the growth policy as you want to. But I think on our end, our hope was to communicate what came out of this to you, and to give an indication of where we think this is headed, and then have a chance to receive your thoughts and feedback. And so this has been really helpful on my end and on our end. And we'll be talking more about this, periodically as things move forward with the code reform project, especially.
Great, thank you. Do one last call for public comment in case anyone would like to provide comment. Okay, seeing none. And one more call from the committee. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think that's the end of our committee business, and we'll be adjourned.